What if I told you Star Wars has just returned to theaters after 7 years, and instead of trying to go bigger than ever, it actually becomes more personal than anything we've seen in a long time? Because I walked into The Mandalorian Grogu expecting a fun return to Star Wars, but I didn't expect to actually feel something again. And honestly, that caught me completely off guard.
This is the way. This is the way.
Welcome to Fatherly Fandom. I'm your host, Chris, and if you love Star Wars deep dives and all things nerdy, you're in the right place. So click that subscribe button. Today, we're talking about The Mandalorian and Grogu, the story, the Easter eggs, the timeline connections, and whether this movie actually succeeds as Star Wars' first theatrical return since Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. And right away, I think people need to understand something important about this film. This is not trying to be traditional Star Wars. No giant Jedi conflicts, no Skywalker family drama, no galaxy-ending stakes, and yes, this is officially the first Star Wars theatrical film without a single lightsaber. And somehow, that actually works in this movie's favor. Alright, right now the Rotten Tomatoes scores are showing a really interesting split. Critics are sitting somewhere between the mid-60s, but the audience score is significantly higher, currently sitting around the high 80s. And honestly, that makes perfect sense to me, because critics seem focused on whether this feels big enough just to justify the theatrical Star Wars release, while audiences are responding emotionally to the characters. And that emotional connection is the thing that this movie absolutely nails. Alright guys, coming off of Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker back in 2019, I felt absolutely nothing. I wasn't emotionally connected to the characters, I wasn't invested in the story, and by the end of the movie, it honestly just felt hollow to me. But The Mandalorian Grogu was the complete opposite experience. I actually cared about these characters, I cared about the relationship, I cared about what happened in the film, and a huge part of that comes from the fact that Din Djarin and Grogu already feel lived in and emotionally developed after multiple seasons together. This movie doesn't waste time trying to convince you to care about them. It simply builds on the relationship audiences already love. It's one of the main reasons I thought they didn't need to advertise as much for this film. And we have to talk about Ludwig Göransson's score, because this soundtrack is incredible. But more importantly, it doesn't try to imitate John Williams. Instead, it creates an entirely different identity for this era of Star Wars. It feels tribal, western, industrial, sometimes even weirdly hypnotic. And honestly, there are moments where the music is carrying the emotional weight of the entire scene, especially during Grogu's quieter moments. This doesn't sound like classic Star Wars. It sounds like The Mandalorian. That distinction really matters, because this movie understands exactly what franchise it belongs to. Alright, we gotta talk about the timeline here. Timeline-wise, The Mandalorian and Grogu takes place after The Mandalorian Season 3, roughly around 11 or 12 ABY, meaning about 11 or 12 years after the Battle of Yavin and the destruction of the Death Star. So we're still deep in New Republic era. The Empire has fallen, but the galaxy is still unstable. Imperial remnants are scattered everywhere, crime syndicates are growing stronger, and the New Republic still feels fragile. And a huge reason this movie feels different comes down to what happened behind the scenes, because originally, The Mandalorian Season 4 was already written. Jon Favreau confirmed he had fully mapped out and completed the scripts before production plans changed. But then Hollywood hit a massive 2023 work stoppage, the Writers Guild and a SAG-AFTRA strike, which shut down production all across the industry. And during that pause, Lucasfilm apparently started rethinking the future of Star Wars on the big screen. Because remember, Star Wars hadn't released a theatrical film since Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker back in 2019. So once the strikes ended, Lucasfilm approached Favreau about turning The Mandalorian into a movie instead. But here's the important part. Favreau said when he and Dave Filoni looked back at the original Season 4 scripts, they realized it simply wasn't a movie. They definitely didn't pull a Moana 2 move. The original version was much more connected to the larger Disney Plus storyline. It reportedly leaned heavily into Grand Admiral Thrawn, crossover storytelling, and setting up Ahsoka Season 2. Basically, it assumed that audiences had watched everything. The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka, all of it. But Favreau realized the theatrical Star Wars movie needed to work differently. He specifically said that he had to completely start from scratch so the movie could function as a standalone adventure, something you could bring casual viewers, families, or even people who've never seen Star Wars to enjoy. And honestly, I think that decision completely shaped why this movie works for some and why it doesn't for others. Dave Filoni also talked about wanting this film to feel like an entry point for new fans, especially kids, which honestly feels very George Lucas, because Lucas always said that Star Wars was made for kids first. It's supposed to be adventurous, fun, simple emotionally, big worlds, big imagination, and I think The Mandalorian and Grogu embraces that philosophy more than almost any modern Star Wars project. This isn't trying to be the darkest Star Wars movie ever made, or the most complicated like Andor. It's trying to capture the feeling of adventure and wonder that made so many of us fall in love with Star Wars growing up. I think families and general audiences are going to connect with that way more than people expect. But if you are a longtime Star Wars fan, oh man, this movie is packed with references references, and some of these deep cuts are honestly insane. Right away, the snowy opening sequence feels heavily inspired by Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. You've got snowtroopers, AT-AT walkers, frozen battlefields, even Imperial mouse droids redesigned specifically for snow environments. And for the first time ever, we finally get to see the full snowtrooper helmet design underneath the classic cloth covering from Empire. Din also uses an Imperial AT-RT walker, a vehicle much more associated with the Clone Wars era. And honestly, watching Din Djarin take down multiple AT-ATs by himself feels like Star Wars flexing how dangerous the Mandalorian actually is. Then the movie dives hard into Clone Wars material. Rotta the Hutt finally returns after first appearing as Jabba the Hutt's son back in the 2008 Star Wars The Clone Wars movie. Great callback to Dave Filoni's first directed Star Wars movie. And the movie even mirrors the original storyline because Rotta is once again tied to a kidnapping plot. And I gotta say, Rotta's moral compass probably comes from Ahsoka. That's a cool callback, and I really hope they get to meet again one day. We also finally get Embo in live action, one of the coolest bounty hunters from the Clone Wars. And yes, he still does have that iconic hat flip combo move from the animated series. Even his ship, the Guillotine, finally appears in live action after originally being planned for the Clone Wars years ago. It looks great on screen too. And if you're a deep cut lore fan, the Droid Gotra appearing is wild because they're basically abandoned separatist battle droids who evolved into a criminal syndicate after the Clone Wars ended. We also get more crossover connections with Star Wars Rebels. Zeb, or Zeb Orrelios, returns in live action, and honestly, he looks fantastic, just like he looked in The Mandalorian Season 3. Seeing him flying a Rebel U-Wing while working alongside the New Republic was awesome. And if you've watched Ahsoka or Rebels, these moments hit even harder. There's also tons of hidden background cameos from directors involved in the Mandalorian series playing New Republic pilots. Dave Filoni shows up again, Deborah Chow appears, Rick Famuyiwa appears, even the legendary Doug Chiang appears as a pilot. This movie is honestly overflowing with the hidden Star Wars creator cameos. And then there's the truly insane deep cut stuff, like Martin Scorsese appearing as an Artinian named Hugo Durant, a four-armed alien fry cook operating a food truck in the galaxy's underworld. And if you've seen Jon Favreau's Chef, you get the reference. And here's another crazy connection to Jon. Jon Favreau previously voiced another Ardenian, Rio Durant, in Solo: A Star Wars Story. So now Favreau and Scorsese are connected through this incredibly obscure Star Wars species, which honestly feels like the most random and hilarious deep lore connection imaginable. We also get Batuu reference from The Galaxy's Edge, Arvest tributes to Carl Weathers, Grogu eating Outpost mixed popcorn, Mudhorn egg callbacks, STAP battle droids from Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace, a live-action turtle tanker from Clone Wars, and even Red Jammer, a scrapped Y-Wing design originally created for Star Wars back in 1977. That level of detail is honestly insane. But underneath all the references and nostalgia, this movie is really about family and legacy. Din Djarin isn't just protecting Grogu anymore. He's raising him, training him, preparing him for survival in a galaxy that's still incredibly dangerous. And honestly, those smaller emotional moments are where this movie becomes something very special. Especially during the quieter scenes where Grogu is separated from Din, because the movie slows down, lets the atmosphere breathe, and suddenly it feels less like a blockbuster and more like a space western fairy tale. And I honestly love the slowdown moments. That's what we got in the original Star Wars, and that's something that we don't see a whole lot of in movies today. Now, to be fair, I completely understand some of the criticism out there. Structurally, the movie does feel episodic at times. It absolutely feels connected to the DNA of the Disney Plus series. And if you walked into this expecting something massive like Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, you may walk out of this disappointed. But honestly, I don't think this movie was ever trying to be any of those. This movie feels like Star Wars getting smaller again in the best possible way. More character-driven, more emotional, more personal, and after years of giant multiverse-style franchise storytelling dominating Hollywood, that honestly feels refreshing. I would personally rank this movie above every sequel trilogy film, and honestly, I even enjoyed it more than Solo: A Star Wars Story, which I've always thought was an underrated Star Wars movie. This movie reminded me of why I fell in love with Star Wars in the first place. Not because of giant stakes, not because of lightsabers, but because of characters you genuinely care about. So my final score for The Mandalorian and Grogu is a solid 8.5 out of 10. And honestly, I can't wait to see it again. I'm really excited for the future of Star Wars, especially with Starfighter coming next and Ahsoka Season 2 continuing this era of Star Wars storytelling. But now I want to hear from you. What did you think of The Mandalorian and Grogu? Did the smaller scale story work for you, or were you hoping for something bigger? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure that you like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future Star Wars videos here on Fatherly Fandom. So thanks for watching, guys, and as always, stay nerdy, my friends. May the Force be with you, and I'll see you next time.